The dust on Clara Whitmore's hands had long since stopped bothering her, though the ache in her back from scrubbing the kitchen floor for the third time that week made her wonder if she would ever stand straight again. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, worn down by 18 months of serving Richard Garrett's wife, as though she were nothing more than property to be ordered about from sunup to sundown. The Arizona Territory sun beat mercilessly through the ranch house windows in the summer of 1878, and Clara had been forbidden to open them because Mrs. Eliza Garrett insisted the dust would ruin her imported furniture. Clara had come west with hope burning in her chest, answering an advertisement for household help at a prosperous ranch near Prescott. The position had promised fair wages, respectable work, and the chance to build a life in the growing territory. What she found instead was a beautiful blonde woman with ice in her veins who took pleasure in humiliation and exhaustion. Richard Garrett himself was rarely home, spending his days overseeing cattle operations across his sprawling property, leaving his wife to rule the household with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. The other ranch hands knew something was wrong. Clara could see it in their eyes when they tipped their hats to her on the rare occasions she was allowed outside to beat rugs or hang laundry. None spoke up, though. Ranch wives held power over their domains, and interfering could mean losing a good position. Clara understood their silence even as it deepened her isolation. She was on her knees that particular afternoon, scrubbing at a spot on the parlor floor that might not have even existed, when Eliza swept in with another impossible demand. The woman was dressed in a lavender gown that must have cost more than Clara would earn in 5 years, her golden hair perfectly arranged despite the heat that left everyone else wilted and miserable. "The silver needs polishing before tonight," Eliza announced without preamble. "All of it. The Hendersons are coming for dinner, and I will not have them thinking I keep a slovenly house." Clara sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of dark brown hair from her damp forehead. "Yes, madam. I will finish this floor and start on the silver immediately." Eliza's blue eyes narrowed. "You will start on the silver now. The floor can wait. Must I constantly repeat myself because you are too simple to remember instructions?" Heat that had nothing to do with the temperature flooded Clara's cheeks. She was not simple. Before her parents died of fever 3 years ago, she had been educated, well-read, and capable. But grief and circumstance had left her with few choices, and Eliza seemed to take particular joy in grinding away any sense of dignity Clara tried to maintain. "I understand, madam," Clara said quietly, rising to her feet. Her knees protested, stiff from hours of kneeling on hard floors. "And do not use that tone with me," Eliza added, though Clara's tone had been nothing but respectful. "You are fortunate to have a position in a good home. There are dozens of girls who would be grateful for such an opportunity." Clara bit back the response burning on her tongue. She had learned that silence was safer than honesty in this house. She gathered her scrub brush and bucket, carrying them toward the kitchen while Eliza's critical gaze followed her every move. The kitchen was at least cooler than the parlor, with its high ceilings and the back door that led to the yard. Clara set down her bucket and immediately began pulling down the silver service from the cabinet. There were dozens of pieces, platters, serving spoons, candlesticks, an ornate tea service, and more. Even working quickly, it would take her hours. She had just begun when she heard boots on the back porch. The door opened, and one of the ranch hands stepped inside, hat in his hands. Clara recognized him as Fletcher Garrison, one of the cowboys who had been with the Garrett ranch for only a few months. He was perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that always seemed to be assessing his surroundings with careful intelligence. Unlike some of the other hands who treated her with awkward pity, Fletcher had always nodded to her with simple respect, as though she were a person rather than a problem to be stepped around. "Afternoon, Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice low and pleasant. "Mrs. Garrett asked me to bring in more firewood for tonight." Clara glanced toward the parlor, anxiety tightening her stomach. "She did not mention it to me. The wood box is there by the stove." Fletcher moved to the woodpile, but his eyes lingered on her face. "You all right, miss? You look worn." The unexpected kindness nearly undid her. Clara felt her throat tighten and forced herself to focus on rubbing polish into a silver spoon with more vigor than necessary. "I am well enough. Thank you for asking." He did not look convinced, but he also did not push. Instead, he stacked wood carefully in the box, taking his time about it. When he finished, he did not immediately leave. "Miss Whitmore, I hope you will not think me forward, but if you ever need anything, you can ask. Some of us on this ranch do not think what goes on in this house is right." Clara's hand stilled. She looked up at him, searching his face for mockery or ulterior motives. She found only genuine concern. "That is kind of you, Mr. Garrison, but I can manage." "Can you?" he asked quietly. "Because from where I stand, managing looks an awful lot like suffering." Before Clara could respond, Eliza's voice rang out from the parlor. "Clara, where have you disappeared to now?" Fletcher's jaw tightened, but he settled his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. As he passed Clara, he said softly, "The offer stands." Then he was gone, and Clara was alone again with her silver and her bruised pride. She worked through the afternoon, her hands moving mechanically while her mind replayed Fletcher's words. No one had acknowledged her situation so plainly before. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as empty sympathy, but something in his eyes had been genuine. The dinner that evening was a nightmare of additional demands. Eliza found fault with everything. The way Clara had arranged the flowers, the temperature of the soup, the polish on the wine glasses. In front of the Hendersons, Eliza maintained a veneer of gracious hospitality, but each criticism was delivered with a smile that made Clara feel lower than the dirt outside. Richard Garrett sat at the head of the table, nodding along with his wife's complaints, never once suggesting that perhaps the expectations were unreasonable. It was past midnight when Clara finally finished cleaning up after the dinner party. Her feet ached, her head pounded, and she wanted nothing more than to collapse onto her narrow bed in the small room off the kitchen. But as she hung up the last of the dish towels, she heard raised voices from upstairs. Eliza and Richard were arguing, their words muffled but heated. Clara tried not to listen, but certain phrases carried clearly down the stairs. Worthless, incompetent, should be dismissed. Her heart sank. If Eliza convinced Richard to fire her, where would she go? She had no family, few savings, and no other prospects in the territory. Sleep was elusive that night. Clara lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling and trying to plan for a future that seemed increasingly hopeless. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, she had reached no conclusions except that she could not continue like this indefinitely. Something had to change. The next morning brought no reprieve. Eliza appeared at breakfast with a list of chores that would have taken 3 people to accomplish in a single day. Clara listened numbly, committing each task to memory, and then set to work without complaint. What else could she do? She was beating rugs in the yard behind the house, her arms burning with effort, when Fletcher appeared leading his horse toward the barn. He slowed when he saw her, taking in the dust coating her dress and the exhaustion she knew must be written across her face. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Mr. Garrison," she replied, pausing in her work. He secured his horse and walked over, his expression troubled. "I heard Mrs. Garrett last night. Her voice carries when she is angry. Clara's hands tightened on the rug beater. "I would prefer not to discuss it." "I am sure you would not," Fletcher said gently, "but pretending everything is fine will not make it so." He hesitated, then continued, "I am leaving the Garrett ranch, heading south to try my hand at starting my own operation. Small scale, just enough to make a living. I came to ask if you would come with me." Clara nearly dropped the beater. "What? Not as a servant," Fletcher said quickly. "As a partner, someone to help build something real. You would have your own space, your own say in how things are run. Equal share of any profits." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncertain. "I know it is bold of me to ask. We barely know each other. But I cannot stand by and watch you be ground down to nothing by people who do not value you." Clara's mind reeled. Leave. With a man she had spoken to perhaps a dozen times. It was madness, completely improper. Her reputation would be ruined if anyone found out. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Say you will think about it," Fletcher urged. "I am not leaving until tomorrow morning. If you decide to come, meet me at the crossroads south of the property at dawn. If you do not come, I will understand and I will never speak of this again." He left her there in the yard, dust motes dancing in the morning light, her entire world tilted on its axis. The sensible thing would be to dismiss his offer immediately. But as Clara returned to her work, she could not stop imagining what it might be like to have a say in her own life again. To be treated as a partner rather than property. To be valued. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Clara completed her tasks mechanically, her mind churning through possibilities and fears. What if Fletcher's offer was not as genuine as it seemed? What if she left and found herself in an even worse situation? But what if she stayed? Could she endure months or years more of Eliza's cruelty? That evening, Eliza called her into the parlor with an imperious gesture. Richard sat in his chair by the window, looking uncomfortable. Clara's stomach dropped. This was it. She was being dismissed. "Clara," Eliza began, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "Mr. Garrett and I have been discussing your performance. We feel that you have not been meeting our standards." Richard shifted but said nothing. Coward, Clara thought with sudden clarity. "I have worked every day from dawn until long after dark," Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have completed every task assigned to me. Completed, perhaps, but not to an acceptable standard," Eliza replied. "You lack the proper attitude for service in a respectable household. Therefore, we are reducing your wages by half, effective immediately. If your work does not improve dramatically, we will have no choice but to let you go. Cut her wages." Clara had barely been able to save anything on her current pay. With half, she would have no hope of ever leaving, of ever building a better life. She would be trapped here indefinitely, at Eliza's mercy. "I understand," Clara heard herself say, though inside she was screaming. She returned to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she began preparing dinner. But something inside her had snapped. She thought of Fletcher's offer, of the possibility of being a partner rather than a servant, of having dignity again. The risk suddenly seemed less frightening than the certainty of this slow destruction of her spirit. That night, Clara waited until the house fell silent. Then she gathered her few belongings: 2 spare dresses, a shawl her mother had made, a small Bible, and the little money she had managed to save. Everything fit into a single worn carpetbag. She changed into her sturdiest dress and boots, braided her hair tightly, and sat on her bed to wait for dawn. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Clara dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every small sound, terrified she would sleep through her chance to leave. When the sky finally began to lighten, she stood on trembling legs and picked up her bag. Her heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. She crept through the kitchen and out the back door. The ranch was quiet, most of the hands still sleeping. The walk to the crossroads seemed to take forever, every step making her more certain she was making a terrible mistake. But when she rounded the final bend and saw Fletcher waiting there with 2 horses and a pack mule, relief flooded through her so intensely she nearly wept. He looked up at her approach, and his whole face transformed with a smile. "You came." "I came," Clara agreed, still hardly believing her own boldness. Fletcher helped her secure her bag to the mule and then assisted her onto one of the horses, a gentle bay mare with kind eyes. "This is Rosie," he said. "She is patient with new riders. Are you comfortable on horseback?" "I have not ridden much," Clara admitted, "but I can learn." "That is all I ask," Fletcher said warmly. He swung up onto his own horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding. "We will take it slow at first. I want to put distance between us and the Garrett ranch before we stop for breakfast." They rode south as the sun climbed higher, painting the Arizona landscape in shades of copper and gold. Clara had rarely left the ranch property in 18 months, and the vastness of the open country both thrilled and terrified her. Fletcher set an easy pace, checking back frequently to make sure she was managing. After several hours, they stopped beside a creek to rest the animals and eat. Fletcher unpacked bread and dried meat, dividing it equally between them. That simple act, sharing the food as equals, made Clara's throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she said quietly as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, "for giving me a choice." Fletcher met her eyes. "Everyone deserves a choice, Miss Whitmore. What was happening at that ranch was not right. Eliza Garrett treated you like you were less than human. Please call me Clara. If we are to be partners, formality seems unnecessary," he smiled. "Clara it is, and you should call me Fletcher." They talked as they ate, Fletcher explaining his plans. He had been saving his wages for years, working various ranches across the territory. He had his eye on a piece of land near Tucson, in the Santa Cruz Valley. It was not much, just enough for a modest herd, but it was beautiful country with good water and grass. He had filed the paperwork and paid the fees. The land was his as of last month. "I will be honest with you," Fletcher said, his gray eyes serious. "It will be hard work. Building a ranch from nothing always is. There will be long days and short rations until we get established, but it will be ours. No one to answer to but ourselves." Clara found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Hard work does not frighten me. Being treated as worthless does. I would rather struggle as a partner than live in comfort as a servant." "I do not think comfort was ever part of your arrangement with the Garretts," Fletcher observed dryly. They traveled for 3 days, moving steadily south through diverse terrain. Fletcher proved to be good company, easy to talk to and quick to laugh. He treated Clara with unfailing respect, making sure she was comfortable and safe each night. They slept with a careful distance between their bedrolls, propriety maintained even in the wilderness. Clara found herself relaxing more with each passing mile. Away from Eliza's constant criticism, she began to remember who she had been before grief and desperation had reduced her to simply surviving. She had opinions about things. She enjoyed discussing the books she had read, the places she hoped to see someday. Fletcher listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing his own experiences. On the 4th day, they reached the land Fletcher had claimed. Clara caught her breath at the beauty of it. The valley spread before them, grassland dotted with mesquite and cottonwoods, mountains rising purple in the distance. A creek ran clear and steady through the property, its banks lined with willows. The air smelled clean and fresh, completely different from the dusty oppression of the Garrett ranch. "What do you think?" Fletcher asked, and Clara heard the hint of nervousness in his voice. "I think it is the most beautiful place I have ever seen," she answered honestly. His relief was palpable. "Good, because we have a lot of work ahead of us." That was an understatement. The property had a rough shelter that the previous owner had built, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it would keep them dry. Fletcher had plans to expand it gradually into a proper house. First, though, they needed to focus on the essentials, securing their water rights, building corrals, and acquiring cattle. They fell into a routine quickly. Fletcher was true to his word about treating Clara as a partner. Every decision was discussed and agreed upon jointly. They worked side by side, clearing brush, mending fences, and preparing for the small herd Fletcher hoped to purchase with his savings. Clara had never done this kind of work before, but she learned quickly, driven by the knowledge that she was building something that belonged to her as much as to him. The physical labor was demanding but satisfying in a way scrubbing floors had never been. At the end of each day, Clara was exhausted, but it was a clean exhaustion, earned through accomplishment rather than futile efforts to satisfy someone who could never be pleased. She slept deeply and woke with the sun, ready to face new challenges. As weeks turned into months, Clara and Fletcher's partnership deepened into friendship. They talked while they worked, sharing stories from their pasts. Fletcher had grown up on a ranch in Texas, the youngest of 5 sons. With no land to inherit, he had struck out on his own at 18, determined to make his own way. He was 26 now and had spent 8 years learning every aspect of ranching before finally feeling ready to start his own operation. Clara told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about parents who had valued education and kindness, about losing them both within a week of each other to the fever that had swept through the city, about the desperate journey west, chasing rumors of opportunity that had led her instead to the Garrett Ranch and 18 months of misery. "You deserved so much better," Fletcher said quietly one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. "I am getting better now," Clara replied, looking around at the land they were shaping together. "This is more than I ever hoped for." Fletcher's eyes met hers across the flames, and Clara felt something shift between them. An awareness that had been building slowly suddenly sharpened into focus. She saw in his face that he felt it too, this pull that was more than friendship, more than partnership. "Clara," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I need you to know that when I asked you to come with me, I truly meant it as a partnership, nothing more. I was not trying to trick you or put you in a position where you felt obligated to me." "I know that," Clara said softly. "You have been nothing but honorable." "But things have changed," Fletcher continued. "At least for me. These past months working beside you, getting to know you, watching you face every challenge with courage and grace. Clara, I have developed feelings for you that go well beyond partnership or friendship." Clara's heart raced. She had been trying to ignore her own growing feelings, uncertain if they were real or simply born from gratitude and proximity. But looking at Fletcher now, at his honest gray eyes and the way he waited for her response without presumption or pressure, she knew what she felt was genuine. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say anything. Afraid you might think I was only responding out of obligation or gratitude." Fletcher stood and moved around the fire to sit beside her. "May I hold your hand?" The careful request, the way he asked permission for even this small intimacy, made Clara's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She nodded and placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused from work, but his touch was gentle. "I am not good with fancy words," Fletcher said, "but I want you to know that you are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met." What I feel for you is not about what you can do for me or how hard you can work. I love who you are, your mind, your spirit, the way you face the world. I love you, Clara." "I love you too," Clara whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and completely right. Fletcher reached up with his free hand to cup her cheek. "May I kiss you?" Clara answered by leaning forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss was tender and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "We should probably talk about what this means," Fletcher said practically. "For our partnership, for our future." "I think it means our partnership is becoming something more," Clara replied. "If you want that." "I want nothing more," Fletcher assured her. "But Clara, I want to do this right. Court you properly, even if we are out here alone. When the time comes, I want to marry you the right way, with a preacher and everything legal. You have had enough of your life controlled by other people's whims. I want you to have the security of knowing that what we build together is truly yours." Clara felt her love for this man deepen even further. He understood what she needed in a way no one else ever had. "I would like that very much." They sat together by the fire long after it burned down to embers, talking about their dreams and plans, stealing kisses that grew gradually less tentative and more passionate. When they finally retreated to their separate bedrolls, Clara lay awake for a long time, marveling at how completely her life had transformed. 6 months ago she had been miserable and trapped. Now she was free, building a life with a man who valued and loved her. It seemed almost too good to be real. The next morning, Fletcher announced they had enough money saved to make the trip to Tucson to purchase their first cattle. "It will only be a small herd to start," he explained. "Maybe 24 head, but it is a beginning." They made the journey together, and Clara got her first real look at the growing town. Tucson was rough and lively, full of miners, ranchers, soldiers from the nearby fort, and people of every description. Fletcher kept her close as they navigated the crowded streets, his hand occasionally resting protectively at the small of her back. At the stockyards, Fletcher evaluated the available cattle with a practiced eye, negotiating firmly but fairly with the sellers. Clara watched with admiration as he selected healthy animals at reasonable prices. When the dealer assumed Fletcher was buying the cattle for himself and barely acknowledged Clara's presence, Fletcher corrected him immediately. "This is my partner, Miss Whitmore. Any agreements need to include her input." The dealer looked surprised but adjusted his attitude accordingly. Clara felt a surge of pride and affection. Fletcher never missed an opportunity to make it clear that she was an equal in their enterprise. With the cattle purchased and arrangements made for delivery, Fletcher took Clara to the general store to stock up on supplies. As they were loading their purchases, Clara noticed a small church across the square. On impulse, she touched Fletcher's arm. "Could we go inside for a moment?" They entered the cool, quiet interior of the church hand in hand. A priest was arranging candles near the altar and turned to greet them with a friendly smile. "Good afternoon. I am Father Miguel. Welcome to Our Lady of Guadalupe. How may I help you?" Fletcher looked at Clara, then back at the priest. "Father, we would like to be married. Is that something you could perform?" Father Miguel's smile widened. "Of course. You have the necessary documents, and will there be family attending?" "No family," Fletcher said. "Just us." "As for documents, we can provide identification and attest that we are both free to marry." The priest nodded. "Then we can certainly arrange a ceremony. Would you like to schedule it for later this month? That would give time for the banns to be posted and for you to make any preparations." Clara found her voice. "Actually, Father, if it is possible, we would prefer to marry soon. Today, even. We have already been living and working together, and while we have maintained propriety, we would like to make our partnership official before God and law." Father Miguel studied them both for a long moment, and Clara saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "I see. You wish to ensure that what you have built together is legally protected. That is wise, especially for a woman in your position." He consulted a ledger on a nearby table. "I can perform the ceremony this afternoon if you can find 2 witnesses. The marriage will be legally registered with the territorial government." "Thank you, Father," Clara said, relief washing over her. "We will return within a few hours." Finding witnesses proved easier than expected. The couple who ran the boarding house where Fletcher had arranged a room for the night agreed to serve, charmed by the romance of the situation. By late afternoon, Clara and Fletcher stood before Father Miguel in the quiet church, speaking their vows with 2 strangers and God as witnesses. Clara wore her best dress, simple but clean, and Fletcher had purchased a new shirt for the occasion. They had no rings, but when Fletcher took her hands in his and promised to love and cherish her for all his days, Clara felt the truth of his commitment in every word. When she made her own vows, she spoke from the heart about partnership, respect, and the future they would build together. "By the authority vested in me by the Catholic Church in the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife," Father Miguel declared. "You may kiss your bride." Fletcher cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, and when they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. They were married. Partners in every sense now, legally bound and protected. No one could separate them or take away what they were building together. That night at the boarding house, they shared a room for the first time as husband and wife. Fletcher was patient and gentle, making sure Clara felt safe and cherished. They explored this new intimacy with care and growing passion, learning each other's bodies as they had learned each other's minds and hearts over the past months. Afterwards, Clara lay in Fletcher's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she whispered. "Neither did I," Fletcher replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "But we will build a good life together, Clara. I promise you that." They returned to their land 2 days later with their small herd, 2 ranch hands Fletcher had hired to help drive the cattle, and enough supplies to last them through the approaching winter. The hands, Miguel and Tom, were young men looking for steady work and a chance to learn ranching. Fletcher made it clear from the start that Clara was co-owner of the operation, and her word carried the same weight as his. The arrival of the cattle marked a new phase in their endeavor. Suddenly there were animals to tend, fences to check constantly, and the ever-present worry about predators and disease. But there was also immense satisfaction in watching their herd graze on their land, in seeing the physical manifestation of everything they had worked toward. Clara took on primary responsibility for the ranch finances, carefully tracking every expense and income in a ledger Fletcher purchased for her in Tucson. She had always been good with numbers, and she enjoyed the challenge of making their limited resources stretch as far as possible. Fletcher valued her input on every decision, and they often spent evenings discussing plans and strategies. As autumn arrived, they worked to expand the cabin into something more comfortable. With Miguel and Tom's help, they added 2 rooms and a proper kitchen. Clara planted a garden, determined to have fresh vegetables to supplement their diet. She had never gardened before, but she learned through trial and error, celebrating each small success. The physical relationship between Clara and Fletcher deepened their emotional bond. They stole moments of intimacy whenever they could, whether a kiss in the barn or making love in their bed at night. Fletcher was always attentive to Clara's needs and desires, treating her pleasure as important as his own. Clara marveled at the difference between her reality and the stories she had heard from other women about marital duties. This was joy, not obligation. Partnership, not submission. Winter came, milder than it would have been further north, but still bringing cold nights and occasional rain. They spent more time indoors, using the opportunity to plan for the spring. Fletcher wanted to expand the herd, and Clara suggested they diversify by adding chickens and possibly a milk cow for their own use. "You are always thinking ahead," Fletcher said admiringly one evening as they reviewed her notes by lamplight. "Someone has to," Clara teased. "You would spend everything we have on more cattle and forget we need to eat." "That is why I need you," Fletcher said, pulling her close. "You keep me practical." "And you keep me dreaming," Clara replied, kissing him. "We balance each other." As winter gave way to spring, Clara began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had always been regular, and when they failed to appear, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She waited another month to be certain before telling Fletcher, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news one evening after dinner, Fletcher's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit with pure joy, and he swept her into his arms, spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "Are you happy about it?" he asked, suddenly anxious. "I know we have not talked much about children yet. If you are not ready, we can wait." "I am happy," Clara assured him. "Nervous, but happy. I think we can manage a baby along with the ranch, do not you?" "We can manage anything together," Fletcher declared confidently. He became even more protective over the following months, trying to take on more of the heavy work to spare Clara. She had to remind him repeatedly that pregnancy was not an illness and that she was perfectly capable of her regular tasks. They compromised, with Clara agreeing to avoid anything too strenuous while insisting on continuing to manage the accounts and help with the lighter work. By late spring, their herd had grown to nearly 40 head, and the ranch was beginning to show a modest profit. Fletcher hired another hand, an older cowboy named Jack who had decades of experience and a wealth of practical knowledge. Jack treated Clara with grandfatherly respect and proved invaluable in teaching the younger men the finer points of cattle management. As Clara's pregnancy advanced, Fletcher made a trip to Tucson to arrange for a midwife to come stay with them as her time approached. He returned with Mrs. Martinez, a capable woman in her 50s who had delivered hundreds of babies. She took one look at the pregnant Clara and the nervous Fletcher and laughed. "First baby, yes. Do not worry so much. This girl is strong and healthy. Everything will be fine." Mrs. Martinez stayed in one of the spare rooms, helping with household tasks and preparing for the birth. Clara found her presence comforting, especially as she had no female relatives or friends nearby. The older woman shared wisdom about motherhood and running a household, treating Clara with the warmth of an aunt or mother. In late July, on a hot afternoon with thunderheads building on the horizon, Clara's labor began. Fletcher went white with fear, but Mrs. Martinez shooed him out of the bedroom with firm instructions to keep the fire going and water hot. "This is women's work," she declared. "You go worry with the men. Your wife will call for you when there is a baby to meet." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Clara had never experienced such pain, but Mrs. Martinez coached her through each contraction with steady encouragement. When Clara felt like she could not endure another moment, the midwife would remind her that women had been doing this since the beginning of time, and that she had the strength to see it through. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith the following day, Clara pushed her son into the world with a final tremendous effort. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy, and Clara burst into tears of relief and joy. Mrs. Martinez cleaned the infant and placed him in Clara's arms. "A beautiful boy. Congratulations, Mama." Clara stared down at her son, overwhelmed by the fierce love that swept through her. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would likely turn gray like his father's. She counted his tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the miracle of him. "Fletcher," she called, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Come meet your son." Fletcher entered hesitantly, looking as though he had aged years overnight. But when he saw Clara holding their baby, his whole face transformed. He knelt beside the bed, touching the infant's cheek with one gentle finger. "He is perfect," Fletcher whispered, awe in his voice. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Clara corrected, smiling despite her exhaustion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names over the past months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Fletcher said, "What about Daniel? After your father?" Clara's eyes filled with tears again. "Yes, Daniel Fletcher Garrison. Perfect." The baby's arrival brought new challenges and joys to their lives. Clara was exhausted from the demands of nursing and caring for an infant, but she had never been happier. Fletcher was a devoted father, taking on even more of the ranch work to give Clara time to recover and bond with Daniel. When he was home, he spent hours simply holding his son, talking to him in a soft voice about the ranch and the life they were building. Mrs. Martinez stayed for 2 weeks after the birth, making sure both Clara and Daniel were thriving before she returned to Tucson. Before she left, she pulled Clara aside. "You have a good man there," she said, nodding toward Fletcher, who was walking Daniel around the yard to give Clara a break. "One who treats you as a partner, not property. That is rare and precious. Treasure it." "I do," Clara promised. "Every single day." As Daniel grew from a newborn to an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Fletcher's careful management and Clara's financial acumen proved a winning combination. They expanded gradually, never overextending themselves, building a solid foundation for their future. By Daniel's 2nd birthday, they had nearly 100 head of cattle and were recognized as one of the up-and-coming ranches in the Santa Cruz Valley. Clara managed to balance motherhood with her responsibilities to the ranch, though it was not always easy. There were days when Daniel was fussy and the accounts needed balancing, and she felt pulled in too many directions. But Fletcher never dismissed her struggles or suggested she should focus solely on domestic duties. Instead, he helped however he could, caring for Daniel while Clara worked on the books, or taking the toddler with him on ranch rounds while Clara caught up on rest. They weathered challenges together. A drought that forced them to cull part of the herd, a difficult winter that tested their resources, the constant threat of rustlers and wild animals. But they also celebrated victories: the birth of a healthy calf crop, successful cattle sales, improvements to the house and outbuildings. Through it all, their love deepened and matured, tested by adversity and strengthened by shared triumph. When Daniel was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time she felt more confident, though no less awed by the miracle of creating life. Fletcher was thrilled, and Daniel was excited about the prospect of a sibling, even if he did not fully understand what it meant. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Clara knew what to expect. She continued with her regular activities almost until her due date, finally agreeing to rest only when Fletcher threatened to carry her to bed himself. Their daughter arrived on a crisp October morning, her birth quicker and less complicated than Daniel's had been. Fletcher was present this time, holding Clara's hand and coaching her through the contractions. When the baby girl emerged with a lusty cry, Clara saw tears streaming down her husband's face. "A daughter," he said wonderingly. "We have a daughter." They named her Sarah after Fletcher's mother. She had Clara's dark hair and Fletcher's gray eyes, and from the moment she drew breath, she had both parents wrapped around her tiny finger. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and showing surprising gentleness for a 3-year-old. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The house was noisier and messier, but also filled with laughter and love. Clara sometimes looked around at her family and her home and could hardly believe how different her life was from those miserable days at the Garrett ranch. She had been treated like a servant, valued only for her labor and treated as less than human. Now she was a partner, a wife, a mother, and a co-owner of a thriving ranch. The transformation still took her breath away. When Sarah was 6 months old, a stranger rode onto their property one afternoon. Fletcher was out checking fence lines, and Clara was in the house with the children when she heard the knock. Something made her uneasy, so she looked out the window before answering. Her heart nearly stopped. Standing on her porch was Richard Garrett. Clara took a steadying breath, checked that both children were safe in their room, and opened the door. She did not invite him in. "Mr. Garrett," she said coolly, "what brings you to our ranch?" Richard looked older than she remembered, with more gray at his temples and new lines around his eyes. He removed his hat, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Whitmore, or should I say Mrs. Garrison, I heard you had married." "News travels," Clara said neutrally. "What do you want?" "May I speak with you? I have come a long way." Against her better judgment, Clara stepped outside, closing the door behind her. She would not allow this man into her home. "Say what you came to say." Richard shifted his weight. "I owe you an apology, several apologies, in fact. My wife's treatment of you was unconscionable, and I did nothing to stop it. I was a coward who chose his own comfort over what was right." Clara crossed her arms. "Is that all?" "No." Richard looked at her directly for the first time. "Eliza left me. Ran off with a merchant from Phoenix about a year after you disappeared. Took a substantial amount of money and left me with debts I am still trying to pay off. In her absence, I have had time to reflect on many things, including how we treated you." "I see," Clara said. She felt no sympathy, only a distant satisfaction that Eliza's cruelty had finally caught up with her. "I know my apology means nothing after so much time," Richard continued, "but I wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong we were. You deserved better, and I failed in my duty as your employer and as a decent human being." Clara studied him for a long moment. She could hold onto her anger and resentment, let it poison her happiness, or she could acknowledge his apology and let it go. The past could not be changed, but she controlled how much power she gave it over her present. "Thank you for your apology, Mr. Garrett," she said finally. "I appreciate you making the journey to deliver it in person. I will not claim that all is forgiven, because the scars from that time run deep. But I also will not let what happened define me anymore. I have built a good life with a good man, and I am happy. That is the best revenge I could ask for." Richard nodded, looking relieved. "You have a beautiful place here. I am glad you found happiness." He settled his hat back on his head. "I will leave you in peace. Again, I am truly sorry." Clara watched him ride away, then stood on the porch for several minutes, processing the unexpected encounter. When Fletcher returned an hour later, she told him about Richard's visit. "How do you feel about it?" Fletcher asked, pulling her into his arms. "Strange," Clara admitted. "Part of me wanted to rage at him, to tell him exactly how much damage he and Eliza did, but mostly I just felt sorry for him. He looked so diminished, so defeated, and I realized that my anger was giving them more power over me than they deserved. I would rather focus on what we have built than on what they tried to take from me." Fletcher kissed her forehead. "You are a remarkable woman, Clara Garrison." I fall more in love with you every day." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Clara leaned against Fletcher's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and felt profound contentment. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking a chance on me. Your life would be simpler if you had started this ranch alone." "Simpler maybe," Fletcher agreed, "but infinitely less rich. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara. You and our children. I would not trade what we have for anything." "Even when I am bossy about the accounts," Clara teased. "Especially then," Fletcher laughed. "Someone has to keep me from spending everything we have on livestock." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Fletcher said, "I have been thinking. The ranch is doing well enough that we could afford to hire more permanent help, maybe even someone to assist you with the children and household tasks. You work so hard, and I want you to have time to simply enjoy your life." Clara considered the suggestion. Part of her bristled at the idea of household help, remembering her own experiences as a servant. But Fletcher was not suggesting she acquire a servant to order around. He was offering to hire someone to assist, to make life easier for the whole family. "If we do hire someone," Clara said slowly, "I want to make sure they are treated well. Fair wages, reasonable hours, respect and dignity." "Of course," Fletcher agreed immediately. "We could ask around in Tucson, see if there is a young woman looking for that kind of position. We would make it clear from the start that she would be treated as part of the household, not as lesser." Over the following months, they did just that. Through Father Miguel's connections, they found Elena, a 19-year-old woman whose family had fallen on hard times. Clara interviewed her personally, being very clear about expectations and treatment. "You will have your own room, time off each week, and a fair wage," Clara explained. "I need help with the children and household tasks, but you will not be working from dawn to midnight. We value rest and personal time in this house." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Garrison. You do not know what this means to my family." Elena fit seamlessly into their household, proving to be wonderful with the children and capable with household tasks. Clara made sure to treat her with the respect she wished she had received at the Garrett Ranch, and Elena responded with loyalty and affection. She became almost like family, eating meals with them and joining in their evening conversations. The ranch continued to grow. By the time Daniel was 7 and Sarah was 4, they had expanded their holdings and now ran nearly 300 head of cattle. Fletcher had become known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and skilled rancher. Clara's financial management ensured they weathered the economic ups and downs that plagued other operations. They welcomed a third child, another son they named James, when Sarah was 5. And 2 years later, a second daughter named Elizabeth completed their family. The house was full of noise and chaos and love, everything Clara had never dared to dream of during those dark days as a servant. Sometimes, usually late at night when everyone else was asleep, Clara would think back to that morning when she had stood at the crossroads, terrified and uncertain, waiting to see if Fletcher would actually be there. The courage it had taken to walk away from the known, even when the known was miserable, still amazed her. But taking that risk had opened up a life beyond her wildest imaginings. Fletcher, for his part, never let Clara forget how much he valued her. He made sure she knew that her contributions to the ranch, her intelligence and capability, were just as important as his. He consulted her on every major decision and deferred to her expertise in areas where she was stronger. Their partnership remained as much a foundation of their success as their love. One evening, when Clara was 40 and Fletcher was 43, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching their children play in the yard. Daniel was 18 now, a capable young man who had recently announced his intention to start his own ranch with money he had saved working for his parents. Sarah was 15, strong-willed and intelligent, already making noises about attending a teacher's college back east. James was 11 and Elizabeth was 9, both still caught up in the magic of childhood. "We did well," Fletcher said, reaching for Clara's hand. "We did," Clara agreed, "though there were times I was not sure we would survive another day. But we always did, together." Clara squeezed his hand, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From servant to partner, from desperation to prosperity, from loneliness to love. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not come that morning?" Clara asked. "If I had lost my courage and stayed at the Garrett ranch?" Fletcher turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "I try not to think about it. The idea of you trapped there, of never knowing you, of this life we built not existing, it is too terrible to contemplate." "I almost did not come," Clara admitted. "I stood in my room that morning, bag in hand, and nearly convinced myself to stay. To choose the devil I knew over the uncertainty of leaving with a man I barely knew." "What changed your mind?" Clara thought back to that long-ago morning, trying to capture the feeling that had finally pushed her out the door. "I realized that staying meant accepting that my life would never get better, that I would always be ground down, always be less than. Taking a chance with you meant at least the possibility of something more. And possibility, even terrifying possibility, was better than the certainty of slow destruction." "I am glad you took the chance," Fletcher said softly, "even though I know how frightening it must have been." "So am I," Clara replied. "Every single day I am glad." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their children's laughter drifted across the yard. In the distance, cattle lowed as the hands drove them toward the pasture for the night. Everything was exactly as it should be. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the natural changes of life. Daniel did start his own ranch, settling on land adjacent to his parents' property. He married a schoolteacher from Tucson, a bright woman named Martha who reminded Clara of herself in the best ways. Sarah went east for her education and returned with a teaching certificate, eventually opening a school in the growing town nearby. James and Elizabeth continued to grow, finding their own paths while remaining close to family. Fletcher's hair turned silver, and Clara found her own dark locks increasingly threaded with white. Their hands became more gnarled from years of hard work, their faces lined with the stories of their lives. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, tempered by shared experiences and strengthened by mutual respect. When they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, the celebration was a grand affair. All 4 children came, bringing spouses and grandchildren. The ranch hands past and present gathered to honor the couple who had built something remarkable through partnership and determination. Father Miguel, ancient now but still vital, said a blessing over the gathering. "What you two have created here is more than a successful ranch," the old priest said, his voice still strong despite his years. "You have built a family and a legacy based on equality, respect, and love. In a world that often tells us power comes from domination, you have proven that true strength comes from partnership." Clara looked around at the assembled crowd, at the evidence of the life she and Fletcher had built, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This was so far beyond anything she had imagined possible when she was scrubbing floors at the Garrett Ranch, treated as less than human by people who should have known better. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Clara and Fletcher lay in bed together as they had thousands of nights before. Clara's head rested on Fletcher's chest, his arms around her, their bodies familiar and comfortable. "Thank you," Clara said softly. "For what?" Fletcher asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For seeing me when I was invisible. For offering partnership when the world said I should be grateful for servitude. For loving me not despite my strength but because of it. For building this life with me." Fletcher kissed her forehead. "I should be thanking you. You took a terrible risk trusting me. You could have stayed in a terrible situation rather than leap into uncertainty. But you were brave enough to choose possibility, and you have made every day since better than I could have imagined." "We made it together," Clara corrected. "That is the point. Neither of us could have done this alone." "No," Fletcher agreed. "But together we could do anything." As Clara drifted toward sleep, safe and warm in her husband's arms, she thought about the girl she had been so many years ago. That Clara had been beaten down but not broken, diminished but not destroyed. She had found the courage to walk away from cruelty and toward hope, to trust a man who offered partnership instead of exploitation. And that single choice, made at a crossroads in the early morning light, had changed everything. It had transformed a servant into a partner, loneliness into love, and desperation into a legacy that would endure for generations. The moon rose high over the ranch, silvering the grass and casting long shadows across the land that Clara and Fletcher had claimed together. In the barn, horses drowsed in their stalls. In the pastures, cattle rested beneath the stars. In the house, children and grandchildren slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and valued. And in the main bedroom, two people who had chosen each other against all odds held one another close, grateful for every day they had been given and every challenge they had overcome together. Their story was not one of rescue but of partnership, not of dependence, but of mutual strength. It was a story of two people who had met at exactly the right moment, when both were ready to build something real and lasting. As Clara finally surrendered to sleep, her last conscious thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for Fletcher's respect, for her children's health and happiness, for the land they had tamed together, and for the love that had sustained them through everything. She had been treated like a servant, yes, but she had refused to accept that definition of herself. And when a cowboy offered her a chance to be a partner instead, she had been brave enough to take it. That bravery had made all the difference. It had opened a door to a future neither of them could have predicted, but both had worked tirelessly to create. Together, they had built a legacy that would last long after they were gone, a testament to what could be achieved when two people treated each other as equals and faced the world side by side. The ranch stood quiet under the stars, solid and enduring, a physical manifestation of everything Clara and Fletcher had accomplished. And as the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, a new day began for the Garrison family, built on the foundation of respect, partnership, and enduring love that Clara and Fletcher had established so many years before. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a life well lived. From servitude to partnership, from despair to joy, from loneliness to love, Clara and Fletcher had taken the raw materials of their lives and fashioned something beautiful and lasting. And in doing so, they had proven that the best foundations are built not on power or control, but on equality, respect, and the courage to choose partnership over domination. As the sun rose over the Arizona territory, its light touched the ranch with gold, blessing the land and the people who had made it their home. And somewhere in the peace of early morning, two souls rested in perfect contentment, knowing they had lived and loved exactly as they were meant to, together from that crossroads forward, partners in every sense until the very end.